This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Magandang umaga, Pilipinas. I am Sarah Esteves together with my partner, John Mark Matias, and today we will take a closer look at the evolution of the Philippine government and its constitution. From the ancient barangays to the struggle for independence and the path toward democracy. Join us as we unfold Philippine government and constitution, a short history.
In tonight's special feature, we look at back the roots of Filipino governance, long before today's republic and even before colonial rule, from the ancient barangay system to the complexities of Spanish colonization. The evolution of leadership in the Philippines is a story of resilience, power, and transformation. We now go live to our correspondent, Adrian, who's reporting from historic site in Laguna. Adrian?
Maraming salamat, John Mark. I'm here at this cultural heritage park that recreates the early communities of the Filipino people. The barangays, which serves as the backbone of the governance in pre-Hispanic times, where life is governed not by presidents or parliaments but by datu or raha. That's right. In these early times, the barangay named after balangay or wooden boats that brought early settlers was the basic political and social unit of society. Each barangay consisted of about 30 to 100 families bound by kinship, alliances, and mutual respect. At the helm of every barangay was the datu, the local chieftain or ruler. The datu wielded authority over the village, acting as its political leader, military commander, lawmaker, and even judge. His power was upheld through strength, wealth, and support from the people, and crucially, through the guidance of a council of elders, composed of respect and wise members of the community. But let's talk about structure. This society was far from equal. There were distinct social classes. The Maharlika were the noble elite, landowners, warriors, and people of high status. They lived in elevated homes and wore fine clothing, often adorned with gold and jewelry. The Timawa were the freemen. These hard-working individuals labored in farming, fishing, or trading and had the right to own property and participate in communal activities. At the bottom of hierarchy were the alipin or slaves, divided into two main groups. All aliping na mamahay lived in their own houses and served their master with a degree of independence. Meanwhile, the aliping sa gigilid were fully dependent on their masters, living in their homes and serving them directly. And there's more happening in other parts of our archipelago. As we move down south, especially here in Mindanao, the arrival of Islam through Arab trades led to the formation of more centralized Muslim states. The Sultanate of Sulu was established in 15th century, followed by the Sultanate of Maguindanao. These sultanates developed more complex political systems influenced by Islamic law, diplomacy, and trade, connecting the Philippines to wider networks across Southeast Asia and Middle East. This was a time of thriving trade, rich culture, and early leadership. Truly, our ancestors were already practicing forms of governance long before colonizations.
That's an incredible glimpse into a highly organized and culturally rich society, Adrian. Now, as we know, everything began to change with the arrival of the Spaniard. What can you tell us about how colonial rule transformed governance in the islands?
That's right, John Mark. The turning point came in 1521 with the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan. Though he met his end in Mactan, space interest in the island persisted, culminating in the formal establishment of colonial rule in 1565 under Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. From then until 1821, the Philippines was administered through the viceroyalty of the New Spain based in Mexico, the Spanish establishment, a centralized hierarchical government pattern after their own. At the top was the Governor General, appointed by the King of Spain, who served as both the chief executive and commander-in-chief. The Royal Audiencia, the colonial version of the Supreme Court, handled major judicial affairs and also served as a check on the governor's power, at least in theory. The initial administrative system, called the encomienda, granted Spanish officials the right to collect tribute from the local inhabitants in exchange for protection and Christianization. While it was supposed to be temporary, it often led to abuse, exploitation, and the erosion of local leadership structures. After Mexico's independence in 1821, the Philippines was ruled directly from Madrid. Spanish authorities implemented the Leyes de Indias, a set of laws governing their colonies which codified the union of church and state under the Patronato Real. This gave the Spanish crown authority over ecclesiastical matters, leading to the rise of Frailocracy, a term used to describe the powerful influence of friars in both spiritual and political life. Parish priests often had more sway than civil governors, especially in rural areas. Locally, Spaniards held the most high-ranking position, the alcalde mayor, who governed a province, and the gobernadorcillo, the town mayor, which were crucial in implementing colonial policies. The native Filipinos were allowed to serve in lower level roles, but always under the supervision of Spanish officials.
So from independent barangays to centralized colonial administration, a massive shift in both power and identity. Thank you, Adrian, for thorough report from the field.
You're welcome, John Mark. It's a history that continues to shape the Filipino identity today. Reporting from the past, I'm Adrian Ampo, bringing history to life. Balik sa inyo, studio.
In the previous segment, we explored how centuries of colonial rule shaped governance in the Philippines. But resistance was never far behind. And that resistance would eventually ignite a nationwide revolution. For more on this turning point in our nation history, we now go on our one correspondence, Jed Alicante. Now, reporting from Revolutionary Heritage Site in Nakawit, Cavite, Jed.
That's right, Cyril. I'm now here at the very site where Philippine independence was declared in 1898, but the journey to that moment was long, bloody, and fueled by generations of defiance. From the earliest days of Spanish colonialization, Filipino did not remain silent. Over 100 recorded revolts erupted across the island, from Raha Sulaiman stand in Manila to the uprising led by Diego and Gabriela Silang, Dagoy in Bohol, and Herman Pule in Quezon. Though this early movement did not achieve independence, they laid the foundation for a spirit of resistance. A major turning point came in 1872 with the Cavite Mutiny. The small military uprising, it led to the arrest of execution of 3 Filipino priests, Father Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, known collectively as Gomburza. Their martyrdom shocked the Filipino community, especially the Ilustrados, the educated elite in Europe. This sparked the propaganda movement, a peaceful push for reforms led by men like Garciano Lopez Jaena, Marcelo H. Del Pilar, and of course Dr. Jose Rizal. Rizal's novel No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo exposed the abuse of the Spanish regime and became an intellectual weapon for Filipino nationalism. But when calls for reform fell on deaf ears, the fight for change turned into a call for revolution.
And this is where the Katipunan enters the scene, the secret society that would finally fan the flames of rebellion. Tell us more, Jed.
Exactly, Cyril. In 1892, after Rizal was exiled to Dapitan, a group of radical Filipinos, many of them former members of his civic group La Liga Filipina, formed the Kataas-Taasan Kagalang-galangan Katipunan ng mga Anak ng Bayan or KKK. Under the leadership of Andres Bonifacio, it was a secret revolutionary movement dedicated to armed resistance against Spain. On August 26, 1896, Bonifacio and his followers stored their cedulous residence certificates in what is now known as the Cry of the Pugadlawin, officially marking the start of the Philippine Revolution. As the revolution spread, Bonifacio tried to unify the movement by heading to Cavite, where the fight was gaining momentum. But internal divisions between the Magdiwang and Magdalog faction led to the Tejeros Convention, where a new revolutionary government was formed, electing General Emilio Aguinaldo as a president. Bonifacio, feeling betrayed, was later executed, a dark and complex chapter in the revolutionary history.
That leadership transition changed the course of revolution. What happened next as Aguinaldo took charge?
With Aguinaldo at the helm, the Republic of Biak na Bato was formed in 1897 in Bulacan. It even had its own constitution, crafted by Isabelo Artacho and Felix Ferrer. But with Spanish forces closing in, both sides agreed to a temporary peace, the Pact of Biak na Bato. Under the pact, Aguinaldo and other revolutionary leaders agreed to go into exile in Hong Kong in exchange for monetary companionship. But many Filipino fighters never laid down their arms, and soon after the fighting resumed. While in exile, Aguinaldo organized the Hong Kong Junta, a revolutionary committee in exile led by Philip Agoncillo, and when the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, Aguinaldo saw an opportunity. He formed an alliance with U.S. Naval Commander Commodore George Dewey, whose fleet had just destroyed the Spanish force in Battle of Manila Bay. Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines and quickly established a revolutionary government. Filipino forces reclaimed many provinces, and finally, on June 12, 1898, right here in Cavite, Aguinaldo proclaimed Philippine independence. The national flag was raised for the first time, and the Marcha Nacional Filipina, now our national anthem, was played.
A powerful moment in our history, but independence would prove to be short-lived. What came next?
Indeed, Cyril, after the declaration, a second revolutionary government was established, with Apolinario Mabini as a chief advisor. This new government hoped for recognition from the United States, which had now taken control of Manila. However, on August 13, 1898, Manila fell not to the Filipino forces who had surrounded it, but to the Americans under a preparage surrender with the Spanish. The very next day, the United States military government was established by order of President William McKinley, and General Wesley Merritt was appointed for the first time in U.S. military governor, followed by Generals Elwell Otis and Arthur MacArthur. What started as revolution for independence would soon evolve into another chapter, one of tension, betrayal, and new foreign power in control.
A turbulent and pivotal moment indeed. Thank you, Jed, for that comprehensive report from the field.
My pleasure, Cyril. History lives on in this place and in the continued pursuit of freedom by every Filipino. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Jed, for that compelling report. The birth of the First Philippine Republic was indeed a proud achievement. But we've seen the struggle for sovereignty was far from over. As the tides of power shifted from Spain to the United States, new tension emerged, leading to one of the most turbulent chapters in Philippine history. To take us through the unfolding events that followed, we now go live to our new field reporter, reporting from Barasuay Church in Malolos, Bulacan.
Good day, this is Ryan Aaron Bagono, reporting on a story of struggle, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of a people yearning for freedom. I'm standing in front of the historic Barasuay Church, known as the cradle of democracy in the East. This very site witnessed the birth of the First Philippine Republic, a bold attempt to show the world that Filipinos were not only ready for independence, but also for self-governance. On September 15, 1898, the Malolos Congress convened here. One of its most important missions was to draft a constitution that would lay the foundation of a republican form government. That task fell to Felipe Calderon, and after much debate, particularly over separation of church and the state, the Malolos Constitution was ratified on November 29, 1898. President Emilio Aguinaldo officially approved it on January 21, 1899. Just 2 days later, on January 23, Aguinaldo took his oath of office as the President of the First Republic of the Philippines, what many now call the Malolos Republic. This was the first democratic republic in Asia, a remarkable milestone not just for the Philippines but for the region.
Truly proud moment, Ryan, but while the Republic was forming here, events abroad were already shaping its fate, particularly with the Treaty of Paris. Tell us more.
Exactly, John Mark. While the Malolos Congress was still in session, the Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898, effectively ending the Spanish-American War. But Filipinos were left out of the negotiation table. Felipe Agoncillo, the Philippines' appointed emissary, was sent to Paris to advocate for recognition of the Philippine independence. However, neither Spain nor the United States acknowledged him or the new republic. In the final treaty, Spain ceded the Philippines along with Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States for $20 million. This development outraged the Filipino leadership. Then on January 4, 1899, U.S. General Elwell Otis, following instruction from President William McKinley, made public the American Proclamation of Sovereignty over the Philippines, a direct recognition of the Philippine Republic's authority.
That set the stage for inevitable conflict between the two forces. So, when did actual fighting begin?
The turning point came out just 1 month after the Republic inauguration. On February 4, 1899, tension escalated into full-blown conflict when a skirmish broke out near San Juan Bridge. It was sparked by a misunderstanding between Filipino and American soldiers. But that moment ignited what became known as the Philippine-American War. Almost immediately, the young republic found itself outmatched. As more American reinforcement arrived from the United States, the Philippine revolutionary forces were forced into retreat. Despite valiant resistance, the various provinces, the balance of power, continued to shift in favor of the Americans.
In the Republic's fall, how did the finally come about?
The final chapter of the First Republic came in March 1901. After months of retreat, the guerrilla warfare, President Emilio Aguinaldo was captured by American forces in Palanan. His capture marked the official fall of the First Philippine Republic. Though resistance would continue in various forms across the archipelago, Aguinaldo made his war allegiance to the United States a symbolic end to the Republic's short-lived dream of self-rule. But for many Filipinos, the ideas of Malolos and the sacrifice made during this time would fuel future generations' fight for genuine independence.
Thank you, Ryan, for walking us through this critical moment in our history. The First Republic may have been brief, but its legacy lives in our democratic aspiration today.
It was a republic born of conviction, courage, and unwavering belief in self-determination. The dream continues to inspire us, John Mark. Reporting from Malolos and beyond, I'm Ryan Aaron Bagono. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Ryan, for that gripping account of Philippine-American War. From the fall of the First Republic to the capture of President Aguinaldo, it was a time of both heartbreak and heroism. But even after the dust of war had settled, the American presence in the Philippines ushered in yet another complex era. For more on the transition from military to civil rule and the long road toward Filipino self-governance, let's head over now to our newest field correspondent, Jeren Moraga. Reporting from the historic grounds of Intramuros, Manila, was the very heart of colonial administration. Jeren? 2, 3.
Good morning, Cyrus. I'm here in Intramuros, where the echoes of American footsteps still linger in the old cobblestone street. This walled city, once the center of the Spanish power, also bore witness the beginning of the American civil rule in the Philippines. Following the capture of Aguinaldo and the collapse of the First Republic of the United States, inaugurated its civil government on July 4, 1901. William Howard Taft, the world later become a U.S. president, was appointed the first civil governor of the Philippines. But despite of this civil transition, military rule remained in the effect in many regions, especially where resistance continued. Southern Luzon resist until 1902, Northern and Central Luzon until 1905, only pacified after the capture of the execution of Philippine Revolutionary Macario Sakay, and here in Mindanao, Muslim resistance prolonged American military presence until as late as 1914.
So it wasn't an overnight transition into peace and order. But when did Philippines begin to participate more actively in governance?
The change started with the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, more popularly known as Philippine Bill of 1902, passed by U.S. Congress. It created the Philippine Assembly, the first all-Filipino elected legislative body. The Philippine Commission, composed mostly of the Americans, served as the upper house, but this was a key step in involving Filipino in government. The first leader of the assembly were historic figure Sergio Osmeña, who served as speaker, and Manuel L. Quezon as a majority floor leader. Those two names were later defined country path toward independence.
And how did the process of Philippinization unfold from here?
Its advanced stability under the administration of the Governor Francis Burton Harrison. During his term, Filipino took over 89% of government. Its position in the commission itself gradually dominated by Filipino officials. It was a significant shift, one that gave Filipino a stronger voice in their own country. This momentum led to the passage of the Jones Law in 1916, also known as a Philippine Autonomy Act. It was a landmark in the independent movement. It's officially declared in the United States intention to grant independence to the Philippines once a stable government was established.
But the path wasn't without setbacks, wasn't it? I recall there was a political crisis that followed.
Absolute, Cyril. The post-Harrison era saw the appointment of Governor Leonard Wood, whose anti-Filipino policies sparked outrage among local leaders. His refusal to delegate authority led to mass resignation of the cabinet member in what now called the cabinet crisis of 1923. Despite political tension, the push for independence persists. Once the most notable moment came in 1931 during a OS Rocks mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas. The effort resulted in the approval of the Hair-Rate Cutting Act, the first U.S. law promising eventual Philippine independence. Whenever this law was rejected by Senate President Manuel Rojas, who argued it had problematic provision, not one to give up, Quezon launched his own mission to Washington and successfully restored a revised version of Tyding-McDuffie Act carried similar provision but more acceptable to Filipino leadership.
And that, of course, laid the foundation for the Commonwealth and the transition toward true independence. Thank you for that deep dive, Jaren.
You're welcome, Cyril. What we've seen here is a story of resilience and political maturity. While colonial rule did disappear overnight, the seed of self-governance have firmly taken root, and those seeds would soon bloom in the Commonwealth era. The final stage toward freedom. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Jaren, for that comprehensive look at the American occupation and the road to self-rule. With the passage of Tydings-McDuffie Act, the stage was finally set for the establishment of the Commonwealth of the Philippines, a critical chapter in the nation's transition to fully independence. To walk us through this pivotal period in the history, we now go to our field correspondent, Jay, who's reporting live from Quezon City, a city named after the Commonwealth First President Miguel.
Good morning, John Mark. I'm standing here in Quezon City. A fitting location for tonight's report as we revisit the legacy of the man who led the country into a new era, President Manuel L. Quezon. The Commonwealth of Philippines was officially born following the Constitutional Convention of 1934, where delegates were collected on July 10 by the Philippine Legislature, their task to draft a constitution that would guide the nation during its 10 years transitional period under the supervision of the United States. The document finalized in 1935 became the 1935 Constitution of the Philippines, and under it the country held its first national presidential elections. The result made history. Manuel L. Quezon was elected as the first president of the Commonwealth, with Sergio Osmeña serving as vice president.
A historic moment indeed, Jay. What were some of the key priorities under the new government?
Well, John Mark, the 1935 Constitution placed a national defense at the forefront, a present move given the global tension brewing at the time. Quezon's administration worked closely with General Douglas MacArthur, who was appointed as military advisor to the Commonwealth, to lay the groundwork for a self-reliant national army, but is once just about defense. The Commonwealth period was marked by government reorganization, with the creation of new government offices to better serve the Filipino people. Several cities were also established during this time, including this very city, Quezon City, which was envisioned by Quezon as the future capital of the nation. One of the most progressive milestones was the granting of women's suffrage after a national plebiscite. Filipino women want the right to vote, making the Philippines one of the first countries in Asia to recognize women's electoral rights.
That's incredible leap forward. How about cultural linguistic developments during his periods.
A great question, John Mark. Along with the political structural reforms, the Quezon administration also turned its focus to national identity. One of the landmark cultural decisions was the adoption of national language. Based on the Tagalog, the Filipino language was formally declared as the basis for the national tongue, a move aimed at unifying the archipelago under shared linguistic heritage. Quezon, often called the father of the national language, believed that common language would be vital in strengthening national unity.
J. It truly seems like the Commonwealth was laying the foundation of the independent and modern republic. But of course, the progress would soon to be tested.
That's right, John Mark. Just as the Philippines was preparing for full independence, World War II erupted, and the country would be plunged into one of the darkest chapters in its history, the Japanese occupation. But for now, the legacy of the Commonwealth endures as a time of hope, rebuilding, and a different sense of national purpose. Back to you in the studio.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay, for that powerful report on the struggles of the Filipino people during the early stage of the Japanese occupation. As we continue our coverage, we now look at how the Philippines moved from occupation to liberation. Resistance to renewal, a pivotal moment that would shape the road to independence. For more on this, we go live to our newest correspondent, Marty, reporting from Leyte, where General Douglas MacArthur made his historic return.
Cyril, good morning. I'm here in Palo, Leyte, where history echoes from the shores. It was right here on October 20, 1944, that General MacArthur, alongside President Sergio Osmeña, landed with over 174,000 American troops, fulfilling a promise that brought hope back to battered nation. But let's take a step back. After the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines the very next day. By January 2, 1942, Manila had fallen and the Japanese military administration was established. George Vargas was appointed chairman of the Philippine Executive Commission under the authority of Japanese High Command. Amid the occupation, the bravery of Filipino and American soldiers stood firm. However, by April 9, 1942, the peninsula of Bataan was forced to surrender, leading to the horrifying Bataan Death March, a nearly 100-kilometer forced trek from Maribeles, Bataan to San Fernando, Pampanga. Roughly 70,000 soldiers suffered and many perished along the way.
A harrowing tragedy, Marty. And yet, despite the occupation, there were movements pushing towards.
That's right, Cyril. Resistance never truly stopped. Guerrilla force operated across the archipelago with leaders like Manuel Rojas and Ramon Magsaysay, organizing underground operation. These fighters were instrumental in gathering intelligence and disrupting Japanese forces, often risking everything. In 1943, Japan attempted to legitimize its occupation by promising independence. Premier Hideki Tojo declared that the Philippines would be free. Under their terms, a preparatory commission was formed to draft a new constitution. The result was the Second Philippine Republic established in October 1943, with Jose P. Laurel as a president and Benigno Aquino Sr. as Speaker of the National Assembly. However, the Republic was widely seen as a puppet state. Meanwhile, in exile, President Quezon passed away on August 1, 1944. In the United States, Sergio Osmeña succeeded him. The later returned the Philippines with MacArthur, the push to reclaim the country.
And reclaim it. They did. Tell us about the final stage of liberation.
Indeed, Cyril. After Leyte, the Allied forces moved rapidly. January 5, 1945, MacArthur landed in Lingaya Gulf. Pushing north, the battle for Manila, which concluded in February 1945, was a devastating confrontation, though the city was reduced to ruins.
A journey of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. Thank you, Martin, for that vivid account from the site of liberation.
And that brings us to an end of our special broadcast, a powerful journey through centuries of courage, resistance, and nation building.
From the humble barangays of pre-Hispanic times to the struggle for independence against foreign powers, and finally to the birth of sovereign nation, the story of the Filipino people as one of strength, unity, and an unbreakable spirit.
Through every war, every revolution, and every sacrifice, our history reminds us that freedom was never simply given. It was earned by generations who dare to dream of better tomorrow.
As we reflect on our past, may we carry its lessons with pride, and may our future be guided by the resilience that defines us as a nation.
Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga, Pilipinas. This has been Philippine Government and Constitution, a short history.